Hello folks, today I want to show you a clock that I just picked up. This is a Brüder Klumak Wein clock. This is the Brothers Klumak of Wien, which is Vienna. This is a very cool standing Vienna regulator style clock, and I'm not going to do a long video on this, but I just kind of wanted to show this off while it was apart because it's a little bit of an unusual clock, at least as far as what most people think of as a Vienna regulator. We've got a silver dial. We've got the sub-seconds. This is a seconds beat clock. And here is our movement. We've got, it's a little hard to see, but there is maintaining power on the movement. That probably can see this side easier. This rod right here connects to the fine-toothed gear next to the main train gear on the winding barrel. So this is maybe half jeweler's regulator, half Vienna. So it's a medium-sized movement. This is quite a bit bigger than a kitchen clock style movement, but it's not quite as massive as some of the ones that we've looked at on this channel. I required the clock with the suspension spring broken, and the movement's kind of gummy. So I'm going to disassemble it, but thought I would just turn the camera on to show you the inside of this clock because I have not seen one quite like this. This Brüder Klumak, they seem to be more of a watch company, and I'm not an expert necessarily on dating these, but this feels like turn of the century, 1890, something like that. With the dial off, we can see our motion works. This is a very, very fine second-hand pivot. And this movement is interesting because it's got this big plate on the bottom, and this is notched. So the frame that attaches to the clock case goes in these little cutouts here, and so that helps you align this, although it's been scratched a little bit on the way in and way out. So that's kind of unusual how the movement works, is held to the case. I'm not sure if that's original or not. It seems like it could be. Similar screws with the blued, looks like lathe-made screws here that exist in various places in the movement. So I'm going to go with this as original. And all right, so we'll get launched into this. One thing that we always want to do when we work on a clock is we remove the power. Now this is a weight-driven clock, so there isn't a spring that we have to unwind necessarily. However, this does have maintaining power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little tension on this inner drum here, and then I'm going to release our maintaining power arm, which will allow us to, there we go, take the movement plates out without anything exploding. Here's the back of the movement. I've pulled out these two screws that will let us remove the verge and hopefully save that from getting damaged. And that just slides out through a little slot in the top. Looking at these, pallets look like they're in pretty good shape. I'll polish these a little bit. This clock, I actually know where this came from. This is one of the few clocks that I have pretty good provenance on. And I know this clock was maintained at least reasonably well, and you can see that it has oil on it as I'm looking at it here for the first time. One other interesting thing is how this attaches to the pendulum. Usually there is a single spike that goes into a little slot in the pendulum rod. This one, on the pendulum rod, there's a brass collar which then rides between this, and then the crutch pushes on both sides of that. This does have beat adjustment. I always like setting this back in the middle, and then we can adjust the beat with a little bit of slipping between our verge and the shaft here. Here's our front side. All of these are machined rather than stamped. Machine pinions. This is my customized screwdriver I'm using that's cut down a little bit to fit these screws, which don't fit modern screwdrivers. So if you do work on clocks like this, it's worth the time to sacrifice something so that it isn't going to damage your screws. These are nicely blued. I'm going to do my best to not scratch this up and put it back together this way. All right, there is our canoe washer. This is part of what provides friction to the time movement. I've got also a brass jaw pliers here that I'm using, and this makes it less likely that I'm going to scratch something if I get a little excited while disassembling things here. And the moment we're all waiting for. There we are. Time-only movements are wonderful to work on because there's relatively little to them, and also there isn't any synchronization. Oftentimes the most frustrating part about working on a clock is trying to get the time to sync up with the strike side, where you're trying to get the warning track to be long enough and the chime to happen in the middle of the snail cam and all kinds of things. Clocks like this, we just don't need to worry about it. It's just quality time. And we're going to get this apart, polished up, ultrasonically clean, put back together. Here's our drum, and this is actually the maintaining power. How this works is this extra tension here, so that's held on with this lever that pushes against this fine-tooth gear right there, hard to see, means that the weight will store up a little bit of energy in this spring, so that while you're winding the barrel, there's still tension on this to run the clock. So you're winding in this direction, but that extra spring pressure wants to keep this gear going in the direction that operates the train, so you don't lose time on the clock while you're winding it. When you're trying to make a clock run accurate to within a couple seconds a week, if it takes you 30 seconds to wind the clock, at best, that means the clock probably isn't running forward. And on some of my clocks that don't have maintaining power, the train actually reverses. So not having maintaining power can make you as much as a minute off in timekeeping over a week. And this is one of the mechanisms that is used to counteract that, which keeps the train running. Oftentimes, this is hidden in between the two gears here, and it's often a spring that's curved. This one is straight. One other thing I want to point out is this is natural gut. This was the traditional thing that was used for weight cords. And I think I'm going to put this back in the clock. It is a little bit discolored here and there, but there's no fraying, and the weight isn't especially heavy. So we're going to reuse this. I also want to point out just how everything is so nicely machined here. Here's our click spring. All of this was not stamped or sawed. It was nicely machined. So this is a nice clock. It's kind of an oddball, but the more I get into this, the more I really like how it's made. All right, we're through the ultrasonic cleaner. The pivots are polished. All the pivot holes are pegged out. And I've got the layer of drivetrain that goes between the plates assembled. Time to put the cover on. I've got the trains back together here, and we can just test the motion of this. I'm just putting a really light amount of pressure on the winding drum, and this is going off like a top. These pivots are very, very small, which is cool. It's just a very finely made clock. We are in pretty good shape here. I think we're ready to put our verge back in. One note, wanted to point out something that is often missed, and that is dealing with the pulley. This was pretty squeaky beforehand and had not been attended to. And so if you have a compound weight like this where you've got a pulley in the train, always take this apart and polish this as well, because that can rob some of your power of the weight in friction in this pivot. I hope you'll forgive the vertical video, but this is what we look like all assembled. You can see my shims as I'm trying to get this to lean in an appropriate way. The distance between the weight and the glass is a little tight, so I needed to tip the clock back a little bit. But I think we're done. I did one other thing, and that is I resilvered our nameplate here. That was unreadable before. But yeah, this is what it looks like. I have one case piece to glue back on. I have the piece, thankfully. I just need to get it glued on. But this is what the clock looks like. We've got a cylinder pendulum. This is a lead weight. This is not a mercury clock. And kind of an interesting bottom cabinet here. And it has a drawer. There's our drawer. It's a nice place to keep the key. One other fun thing on this clock is it has ball detents in the case for both the lower and the upper doors. And as far as I can tell, these are actually marbles. Now, is that original? I think it might be. I don't know why it wouldn't be. Marbles have been around a long time, and the top door has that similar feature here, if I can get it open. There's our marble bearing in this one too. So this is a pretty interesting clock. It's from Vienna, but it's not exactly a Vienna regulator. It's built more like a jeweler's regulator. It's got interesting pendulum mechanism, interesting cabinet. I've admired this clock for a long time and was really pleased I had the chance to pick it up. Anyway, this has been just a really quick project. This is a one-day start and stop, so I didn't do some of the rigor that normally goes into a movement repair, didn't do as much polishing as sometimes I would. But yeah, I appreciate you being along with this project. Thanks for watching.